From the Millers of the University Weather Center, this is student meteorologist Peyton.
And I'm student meteorologist Ethan Kerr.
Here with another edition of Weather Watch. And Ethan, we have a Cat 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico right now.
Yeah, I went to bed. It was a Cat 1, I think, by the time I fell asleep. And
Yeah.
this morning it was 120, and then they brought it up to 150 like an hour later. It's been going nuts.
It's been absolutely exploding. This is some of the fastest intensification I've seen in quite some time. It's near the Yucatan Peninsula at this point, and it's going to be making a landfall on the west coast of Florida Wednesday evening. So why don't we jump into it with some satellite images? And that is Major Hurricane Milton, Cat 5, as of maybe 30 minutes ago when the Hurricane Center bumped it to 160 miles per hour. This is a little hurricane, very small, very symmetrical. You notice these high cloud, wrong mouse, high cloud tops, and I put it to visible. We'll look at that then. But this high cloud tops, these cold cloud tops, very symmetrical. It's what we call the central dense overcast. It's very symmetrical. This storm is breathing, it's outflowing, and it's staying just south of the highest wind shear, which is to the north. And actually, that might be helping to ventilate this system to keep it strengthening. It also has a really small pinhole eye, and this storm is still deepening as we speak. And the hurricane hunters are in there and still finding this storm just plummeting in the pressures.
Yeah. This storm, and to add on to what Peyton was saying about this being really small, if you look at tropical tidbits, it shows you the how far out the hurricane force winds go. Only 20 to 25 nautical miles out from the center. So it's a really small storm. It's only a few dozen miles across in the hurricane force winds, and these small storms are able to ramp up very quickly. These storms with these, as Peyton I think mentioned, the pinhole eye. This is up there with Wilma from 2005 as the fastest intensifications in the Atlantic. Only a couple others have been faster. Wilma's one of them. And again, this when they're smaller, it doesn't take as many thunderstorms, hot towers going around the center to really drop the pressure because it's smaller. And then because it's smaller, you also have a much tighter pressure gradient. If you had a larger storm with the same minimum pressure, you have a tighter pressure gradient and stronger winds. So that's how these things are really able to explode super quickly. Something, we didn't see this with Helene. Helene intensified quickly, but it wasn't to this level. Helene was a much larger storm at that intensification stage.
Yeah, right. And one thing we also have to mention, again, this pressure is plummeting. I also want to show a visible satellite on COD. You see all these plus signs in the center of that storm? That is lightning in the eye wall. This is throwing out a tremendous amount of lightning, some of the most I've seen in a hurricane eye wall in the middle of the ocean. Clear indication this thing is still exploding in intensity. I do believe that this could rival Hurricane Rita, which had 180 mile per hour winds back in 2005. Also, one interesting note, Ethan, the hurricane hunters encountered hail inside an eye wall. That is incredibly rare to do.
Yeah, hurricanes, they're warm core storms, as people call them. They're warm, and obviously you need some cold air to have hail. So you're getting incredibly vigorous convection and thunderstorms in the eye wall to be able to get hail in a hurricane.
Yeah, so this is a tremendous hurricane to watch on the satellite. It's going to be passing very close to the Yucatan. I also want to draw a comparison. As Ethan said, this is a small hurricane. So was Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. Also very pinhole. This had a devastating landfall in South Florida, really Homestead. So I just had to bring this up that, again, and this was a 165. Also to note, Hurricane Milton is also the most intense hurricane of the 2024 hurricane season, beating out Beryl. Back in July, Beryl had a pressure of 934. This is a 925, the last I saw.
925 and dropping.
And dropping. I expect the wind speeds to exceed Beryl as well. Beryl had a top wind speed of 165. I could see this thing easily being 175, 180, maybe even 185 miles per hour when all is said and done. And I want to draw over here to the Hurricane Center track. Well, this is right on the top of Tampa, this M. But don't focus on the cone. Focus on the polygons that this thing is going to be making a catastrophic landfall at this point. Major hurricane expected on the west coast of Florida. You can notice the pinks, all the pinks that extend really from down from the Everglades up toward Big Bend of Florida and into the Orlando area. They'll probably be extended out all the way to the Space Coast. at some point later today. So that's where we expect these hurricane force winds to be. This is going to be a major landfall, really.
Yeah.
It could very well be on top of Tampa.
Yeah, and you notice those hurricane warnings, as Peyton mentioned, well inland of the coast, and eventually they might extend them to the east coast. This thing's probably going to maintain hurricane intensity across the Florida Peninsula. So we're talking about 75 plus mile per hour wind gusts well inland in places like Orlando. So this is not just a coastal event for Florida on Wednesday and Thursday.
Nope, and the Hurricane Center is forecasting a 7 p.m. Wednesday evening landfall.
Yeah.
And again, this is not the only main concern with this hurricane. We also have a lot of storm surge problems.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the storm surge graphic. I mean, if this thing were to, wobble, these things wobble, and that's why there's a cone where the center is going to pass. If that passes just to the north of Tampa Bay, if it passes right in there, you're going to have a lot of storm surge piling into Tampa Bay. There could be up to 15 feet of storm surge somewhere along the Florida coast, west coast.
The problem with Tampa is obviously it's a large city and you have a lot of infrastructure and people there, but Tampa has been really lucky in terms of dodging hurricanes. They have not had a hurricane impact since, I believe, 1921. It's been over 100 years since Tampa was directly impacted by a hurricane. So this isn't an area that's really been tested with significant 8 to 12 foot plus storm surge. In fact, Helene a week ago was the kind of benchmark storm surge event for the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, with like 7 to 8 foot storm surge tops, and that was kind of their record of the past 100 years. So, if Milton does make that landfall just north of Tampa, you can expect that record to potentially be broken again, because again, we just haven't seen anything like this in a very long time for Tampa.
Yeah, and we always talk about storm surge on the West Coast, Ethan. Continental shelf is very shallow, and that's what can really allow this surge to pile up.
Yeah, rides up the continental shelf, and then the Tampa Bay itself. You can see this like how it's concave, Tampa Bay, so that helps to funnel water in there even stronger than it would otherwise.
Yeah, and again, we have storm surge watches, I believe, all the way down from the tip of Florida, all the way up through Collier County, Marco Island, up through Pinellas and Hillsborough County, and all the way up into Orange County and Big Bend, Florida. So that is, a lot of storm surge. So anybody near the coast, we already have evacuations underway, but if you're in one of these evacuation zones, you need to get away from the coast. I mean, storm surge is one of the peak killers in hurricanes, and you just don't want to mess around with it.
Yeah, and it might wind up being the biggest issue with Milton. And the big thing to watch with storm surge is wherever the hurricane makes landfall, the most significant storm surge is probably going to wind up being just south of that, because on the south side of this circulation, that's where you're getting onshore winds from the west as they rotate counterclockwise around the hurricane. So you'd expect probably the strongest onshore flow just to the south of the center, where you have those strongest westerly winds. But again, the problem is we don't know yet exactly where it'll make landfall. Will it make landfall up here or more farther south down here? There's still uncertainty there, and that's why you need to heed those evacuations and those warnings no matter where you live, because again, there's still uncertainty. Even if you don't wind up getting hit by the storm surge when all is said and done, you should still take the precaution anyways, just like you would, if there's a tornado warning. If there's a tornado warning, you're probably not going to get hit by a tornado, but you take the precautions anyways because of that chance that you do.
Right, absolutely. I just want to throw it over to the hurricane hunters. We have an Air Force plane that's in there as we speak. I just want to show where they're at as where they are right now. So this is center. They were just in there, did a pass not long ago, 9:25. The hurricane hunters have since flown out, and they're over here now. But 9:25, I don't know if they're going to make another pass before going back.
I'm not sure. But look at that 9:30. That's a 10 millibar between those last 2 points. 10 millibar pressure drop in just a little bit more than an hour between passes through the center.
Yeah,
so extreme intensification.
And this is from a few hours ago.
Yeah.
It's a 9:47 and almost did a 20 millibar drop in about maybe 3 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as explosive intensification as you're ever going to see. So again, hurricane hunters are in there. There's more flights going to be going into this, obviously, because this recon data gets fed into the computer models that we use, and that helps to determine where this storm could ultimately end up going.
Yeah. And you look at these graphs. So this is the estimated flight level winds. They also have the estimated surface winds, which the instruments, the SFMRs, the National Hurricane Center has stopped using those for this season to kind of inform them on hurricane intensity because there might be some data quality issues with them. So they're kind of just going off flight level winds and some other variables they use. But usually they look at the flight level winds, and here's what I want to see. And they'll usually, flight levels around 700 millibars typically with the hurricane hunters, and they usually multiply it by about 0.9 to get the estimated surface wind. That's kind of the expected wind reduction from that level to the surface. So you can see these flight level winds in the black, and with each consecutive pass, they're increasing pretty notably. And you had peak flight level winds of 158 knots in their last pass, which translated to Cat 5 winds near the surface of about 140 knots.
And hence why the Hurricane Center did a special advisory to upgrade it to 5. Also notice as the winds are going up, notice this blue line, that's the sea level pressure, going down with each pass. So the stronger, the more intense the pressure is, the lower the pressure is, the stronger your winds are going to be due to that pressure gradient. So yeah, a very classic tropical cyclone ongoing in the Gulf of Mexico. Very small too.
Yeah, and another interesting thing to look at with the eye is the temperature and dew point, because in the eye, you have a strong eye if your temperatures really spike up in the eye, and that's what happens when you get the sinking air in the eye of the hurricane. That's why it's clear. You get sinking air, and you get adiabatic warming from that air sinking and compressing, and the temperature increasing. And that's why you get that spike in temperature in the eye. And when you get that, that's even more of a signal that you're dealing with a really intense hurricane.
Yeah, right. I want to throw it over to this website. I want to show Milton. I want to blow this image up, so we can look at the shear. There it is, the deep shear. Let me take off the forecast track. Milton is right there. It's right on the edge of neutral. There's some wind shear, but the greatest wind shear is to the north of it. And that was going to be a question with this storm, how strong it got, was where it actually went. It has been staying south of that wind shear in a pocket of low wind shear, and that's been, allowing it to really amplify over the past couple hours. In fact, this wind shear could actually be helping to ventilate the storm, as it did say earlier, keep it strengthening, keep it breathing, and it's doing a really good job at that so far.
Yeah, I mean, the wind shear too, it has a mostly westerly component to the wind shear, so it's in a similar direction as the storm's moving, which kind of limits the kind of storm relative shear that it feels. So it's not too much of a sheared environment now, but I don't know if you want to start talking about what it's going to do in the future, because we do expect some changes with Milton over the next couple of days before landfall.
Yeah, right. So this is the newest GFS run. It's coming in as we speak. So there's Milton now. Well, this didn't initialize very good, did it? It started with a 983 low, so that's always great. That not a great initialization, but anyway, position-wise, it's pretty good. That's going to come down. It's going to be really near the Yucatan. It'll be close if it makes a landfall in the Yucatan. I think it just stays offshore, which is not good, because then it can still feed on the warm ocean.
It's good for the people in Yucatan, though,
but
not great potentially for us in the United States.
But it's going to keep over the open waters, and it's going to come up towards Tampa Bay, and GFS wants to take it just to the north of Tampa Bay. But one thing I want to show is dry air. Now, right now, this dry air is not an issue with this storm. Not an issue. You see no dry air, no brown colors. But as we get moving towards the Tampa Bay, you notice that this dry air is starting to wrap around, and it's going to start to ingest into the system. This could help to weaken it, but the question is, will it get there in time? And if it does it get in? Because sometimes these hurricanes form their own little pockets of protection.
Yeah.
And it could maybe not penetrate into the storm to help weaken it. Now, I do believe when we get to landfall, it is going to start to weaken, because it is going to start to feel some wind shear along with this dry air. But this dry air could very well be helping to limit the intensity of this hurricane as it comes to shore. Right now it's Cat 3 4.
Yeah, and another thing with small storms is small storms can intensify really quickly, but they can also weaken equally as fast when they're dealing with wind shear and dry air. Now, the thing with this is we're expecting through the next day or so, while this thing's still near max intensity, eye wall replacement cycles, which is when you get sort of an outer ring of convection that takes over, forms an outer eye wall, and essentially chokes off the previous or inner eye wall until it weakens, and then the outer eye wall takes over. And what that does is it increases the radius of the storm, the size of the storm. So this storm's tiny now. It's not going to be so tiny when it's impacting Florida, which is why, regardless of if it does weaken to a Category 3 hurricane, we're talking about some significant storm surge and still the wind and rain issues. Remember, I think a big thing to note is, if this thing's weakening, where the most significant hurricane in modern American history, Katrina, was also a Cat 5 in the Gulf, and it pretty rapidly weakened to a Cat 3 when it made landfall in Louisiana and Mississippi. That did not impact the storm surge at all. It still had a 20 to 30 foot storm surge despite being a Cat 3. Not saying that we're going to get 20 to 30 foot storm surge with this, because we're not, but the point is, just because it's Cat 3 doesn't mean that we're going to be dealing with lesser impacts from water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe at some point this storm will go through an eye wall replacement cycle. The question is when. They're really hard to predict when it is. There's been some talk that it might start to do one at some point over the next day. Looking at some radars in Mexico, looked like there could be one. Who knows if that'll actually do it? And sometimes, these storms can do rapid eye wall replacement cycles and it doesn't do anything to it. But again, I do believe this dry air gets in there. I also want to show the wind shear with this component. So we back it up to where it is now. Okay, so it's in a decent pocket of low wind shear, but as it moves towards Florida, it gets more entangled up into that wind shear, and that's also going to be helping. Now, as Ethan said, it is going to be a little, parallel to the wind shear, but it will be enough directional shear that it will start to weaken, lose wind intensity as it approaches the Florida coast.
Yeah, and looking at these upper level winds a little more, these are the 200 millibar winds, and what Peyton was talking about with when these tropical systems interact with these troughs, sometimes the wind shear can help it intensify if it's in a correct situation. And this, at least for now, has been, when you get a jet streak northeast of the hurricane, that's when you can get increased divergence, because a hurricane, you have this low-level convergence, and then you have an upper-level area of high pressure that spins clockwise, and that's evacuating air away from the center, and that's how you decrease the pressure, by removing air from the column of in the hurricane. And when you get this jet streak, you get winds speeding up away from the hurricane, and that's what can help lower the pressures. But again, as it moves north, as Peyton was saying, it starts to get a little bit more entangled in that shear, and it becomes a lot stronger. So yeah.
Right, and obviously with this interacting with this jet streak, this could allow for more enhanced rain because it's going to be in that right entrance. He's saying there's divergence there. And there's also currently ongoing in Florida something we call a predecessor rain event, so that could help exacerbate the flooding concerns. And away from storm surge, we're just talking about standard freshwater flooding at this point. So that is just something we have to keep an eye on. This is not a good situation.
Inland flooding is probably the next biggest issue behind storm surge. There could be, I think, let's see what the graphic shows. They've got, what is it, 6 to 8 and 8+ inches of rain for parts of Florida. So yeah, definitely could have rain issues as well.
Yeah, and this, coming on top of, they already up in Big Bend. This is WPC excessive rainfall outlook. They have a level 3 out of 4, a moderate risk. I would not be shocked to see them put down a high risk, a level 4 out of 4 in some of these areas. There's also a little bit of a tornado potential out of this storm, as what there is with every landfalling tropical cyclone in the right front quadrant. We'll go to the SPC. This is for tomorrow. We have a little marginal risk, a 2% tour from really Tampa all the way down into the Keys. And there is Wednesdays. We have a slight risk really that follows from I-4 all the way down to the Keys and Key West. Miami's included. So we can see a couple tropical tornadoes with this as well. I think there'll be a few as well with this storm. But nothing, I don't know if we're going to have a massive outbreak.
Yeah, well, it'll be tough because there's not going to be too much real estate in the Florida Peninsula for that right front quadrant to cover. But one last thing I wanted to look at was uh, this site, which kind of shows the some of the hurricane models, and it shows the kind of the three big variables you look at when forecasting hurricane intensity: your sea surface temperatures, your wind shear, and your mid-level relative humidity, how moist the air is, how dry the air is. And what you can see is these models show landfall. Again, it's around, I think it's around 0Z here. And at around 0Z, you can see in the like day or so preceding that wind shear really increased. We're talking 20 to 40 knots in the day before, or I'm sorry, 9. This is 0Z. All right, not that strong. It's about 20 knots before landfall on October 9th at 0Z. And then the relative humidity, this is the bigger one, is look at how much that drops before landfall around 9 October. Is that right, Peyton? When is the land? I'm mixing up the dates. Would that be
Wednesday? I believe is the 9th. So
now it's Wednesday night. So would that be 0Z on the 10th?
yes.
Okay, so that's where the landfall is. So you are dealing with 20 to 40 knots shear in the hours before landfall. And again, that mid-level relative humidity drops below 60%, at least according to these models. So those two conditions are why we expect some weakening, at least in the maximum wind speed, but not really in terms of the storm surge before landfall.
Yeah, right. Again, heed every evacuation. I strongly recommend, if you live right by the coast, you got to get off the coast. I mean, you don't want to be around for this storm surge. Helene had a lot of storm surge only a little less than a week ago, and broke records in Tampa Bay, and those records could be shattered again, depending on the exact track of Milton. So, yeah, this is a very dangerous situation. I saw that Tampa Bay Airport is closing at 9 a.m. tomorrow, pending for this storm. So, yeah, airports are closing already.
Yeah.
So
I think we've covered about everything, Peyton.
I think we covered about everything too. So that will do it for this edition of Weather Watch. Tune in. I think we're going to be doing other videos on this as well.
Probably Wednesday before landfall.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing another video on Wednesday. So tune in then. Thank you.